In today's video, we're going to be ranking the worst psychiatric side effects in a tier list. The worst is what I call hell up here, and the best really is survivable, because we are talking about negatives and we're talking about side effects. And as you can see on the bottom, we have a whole range of different side effects. These are the important ones which I've come across over the last 10 years as a psychiatrist that focuses on these things. So let's jump into it. So the first one we're going to be looking at is cognitive damage from ECT. Now, this is something really quite serious that is underrated. And I think it's underrated because not a lot of people get ECT comparatively to antidepressants, but it's still over 1 million people a year, with the lion's share of them being in the United States. For a long time, we have been lying to patients about the memory problems from ECT being short-lasting and not that serious. Recent research that's coming out is showing that is not the case, and some people, they will lose memories of the most important things in their life: the birth of their children, meeting their spouse, marrying their spouse. Even some people have reported losing like years of college, so much so that they are unable to do their professional duties. And because of that, I'm going to put ECT cognitive damage up here in the horror movie range category, where, if this happens to you, it can feel like you are waking up in a horror movie. The next one is low neutrophils. This is otherwise called agranulocytosis. Again, not totally appreciated by many people because it's a side effect of a drug called Clozapine. Clozapine is sort of the apex predator of the antipsychotics. When every single antipsychotic wears off, people get put on Clozapine. And sometimes it can crash your neutrophils, and you can end up with an AIDS-like illness. If you have no neutrophils, which are the white blood cells which fight infections, you can get sick, you can get pneumonias, you can develop all sorts of different conditions, and you can actually die from that. So I'm going to put this up here as life-changing. Most people catch it before that happens. They get on antibiotics and they don't die. Next one is neuroleptic malignant syndrome. So this is a side effect that you get with antipsychotic medications. No one really knows why it happens. Some people are just sensitive to it, but the chance of having this goes up if you're on multiple antipsychotics. Essentially what happens is you have an electrical storm in the brain that essentially causes your physiology to go haywire. People become very feverish. They start to get tremors. They tremor so much and they become so rigid, their muscles break down. It floods the body with breakdown products from muscles, which clog the kidneys up. People often get kidney failure when this happens. And many people can also go on to have seizures and die. And so, again, this usually gets caught early enough that it doesn't lead to that. So I'm going to put this here in life-changing. And there was another one that I wanted to associate with that, and that's serotonin syndrome. This is essentially the exact same thing as NMS, but it happens with SSRIs when you combine it with other serotonergic drugs. Okay, so the next one is SJS. This stands for Stevens-Johnson syndrome. Now, this is a side effect to Lamictal or lamotrigine. And essentially what this is, it's an autoimmune condition where you take the drug and your immune cells start to attack your skin. This can cause large portions of your skin to actually slough off. So your skin starts to fall off, and it can be really disfiguring. It can lead to scarring. And so because of that, some people even die. I'm going to put this down here in major life disruption. This is rare. Obviously, you could say, how could this not be hell? Because some people can die. It can be totally disfiguring. I'm using a bit of license as a clinician here. Usually this is caught early enough, the drug is discontinued, and it doesn't happen. But yes, obviously, this could be worse. The next one is homicide. So this is a controversial topic. Many people think that psychiatric medications cannot be involved in violence, mass shootings, all that kind of stuff. It's simply not the case. If you look at the drug labels across multiple different drugs, drugs like Adderall, one of the warnings there is for aggression and violence. If you look at Abilify, it says it can cause homicidal ideation in the adverse effects section. If you look at drugs like Chantix as well, that's associated with aggression. SSRIs also associated with aggression. These are not common side effects by any means. These are paradoxical reactions that occur in a very small proportion of people. And yes, they can push people into violent behavior. One of the most interesting cases about this is actually the Aurora shooter, James Holmes. And if you look at the documentary that was done about him after he went into the theater dressed as, I think, the Joker, and he killed several people, injured multiple more, there is a really strong argument that this happened in the context of a mania induced by going up on the dose of Zoloft. The defense chose not to go with that because they thought, this is my speculation based on what I've read, they thought that if it looked like there was some avoidance of culpability there, it would look really bad. He was facing the death penalty. There are also some psychiatrists saying, hey, well, he had that dose increase and then he stopped the drug for 3 weeks and then, he did that act. Again, that sounds kind of compelling, but for most doctors who work with patients who are manic, you get people who snort cocaine or who get exposed to ADHD drugs, and even if you stop them, the mania kind of builds and keeps on going for several weeks. And so I wasn't convinced by that. Lots of people think that James Holmes actually carried out that shooting because of a drug-induced reaction, a mania. And for that reason, I'm going to put this up in hell, because if you have an adverse reaction to a psychiatric medication and it makes you kill people or harm them, you can go to prison for the rest of your life, essentially be characterized as a complete psycho. I don't ultimately know what happened with James Holmes, but he may not be as bad as the media made him appear based on what I've seen about the medications. And so this can completely ruin your life. And for that, I put drug-induced homicide on psychiatric medications in the hell category. The next one is sleepwalking. And so this is the Ambien one, or the Ambien defense. And I hope I don't butcher this, but I think was it Roseanne Barr who said she tweeted, she I think she had some racist tweet a couple of years ago when she was jumping on a flight, and she got totally canceled, and she was like, it was the Ambien. This also turned up with Bobby Kennedy's sister. She was caught swerving all over the road, and she was saying she was sleep driving because she was on Ambien. People have had sex with people while they've been doing this. They've done illegal things. And so I'm going to put this up here in horror movie, because what is worse than getting on a drug and doing a whole bunch of crazy things that really are out of character for you because you're dreaming. No one believes you when it happens. They think it's an excuse. And so, that's an awful side effect to have. And it's for this reason, I actually think no one should take Ambien. I think Ambien is horrible. Like, listen, I don't like benzodiazepines, but at least they don't make you sleepwalk and have sleep sex and do all sorts of random things while you're asleep. If you're going to be on a high potency sedative, take a benzo, get rid of the Ambien. Weight gain, antipsychotics. Okay, this can be really, really bad. I have seen people gain 50 to 100 pounds on antipsychotic medications. And sure, you might be saying, well, if you get off the medication, it goes away. Could this really be that serious? I'm going to say yes, because the people that I see when this happens, it's absolutely disfiguring to their body. All of that loose skin does not go away. You kind of need surgery if you want to sort of get that sort of nipped and tucked in. And it can be horrible for your self-esteem. It also causes a whole bunch of metabolic problems as well. And I'm actually going to put that up in horror movie. And this is not because some of these other things are worse. I'm putting it up there as well because this is really common. So many people are on antipsychotics and have completely ballooned because of it. And so I think that's one of the worst. PSSD, I talk a lot about that here on this channel. This is where you essentially develop enduring sexual dysfunction that does not go away when you come off SSRIs and SNRIs. The other issue that comes along with this is that people become really dissociated and blunted, and they have cognitive impairment, and so they feel completely disconnected from their emotions and people that they love. Thankfully, it's recognized in the drug labels in the European Union, in Australia, in Canada, and in Hong Kong. The FDA in the US is absolutely pathetic. They've been sitting on this for 6 years, and they still haven't ruled about it. They act more like advocates for the drug, trying to protect it rather than actually wanting to do their actual job, which is to warn doctors and patients about side effects. And so I think they're holding back for really weak political reasons because they want the drugs to look good because they're psychiatrists and kind of their career and their reputation depends on it. I think that's atrocious. But yes, if you get PSSD, I'm going to put this up here in hell, actually, because I've heard a lot of stories about people who their lives have completely changed, and it is quite uncertain whether people actually get better from this. In fact, there is pretty good evidence that for some people this can be permanent. And I just imagine, like, if you're like a young person and you get put on this as, I don't know, when you're like 12 or you're a teenager or something like that, doctor doesn't tell you about this. They go, oh, the drug is safe and effective. Everyone's using it. And if this happens to you, you've essentially really derailed your life, usually for a poor reason. So I would say that's like waking up in hell. Metabolic syndrome. Here we have. So metabolic syndrome, this is for antipsychotics and drugs like mirtazapine. These drugs cause glucose dysregulation and also problems with your lipids. And so why is that a big deal? Well, lipid problems and glucose dysregulation are the major risk factors for things like Alzheimer's disease and cardiovascular disease. And so these can cause a whole bunch of life-shortening effects in the long run. Yes, it's not as bad as some of these other ones, so I'm going to put this down here in survivable. Obviously, that's not ideal, but compared to the others on this list, it's just not that bad. Weight gain on antidepressants, so SSRIs and such. Quite common for me to see maybe 10 to 20 pounds gained over a couple of years on these medications, although many people, they don't gain that much weight. I'm going to put this down here in survivable. So let's talk about suicide or suicidal behavior now. This can happen with essentially all psychiatric medications. And the reason is that these drugs can have paradoxical effects, just like with the homicide situation. Some people will become more depressed when they take these medications. And yes, it can push them into acting on suicidal behavior. Many people for a long time believed that this wasn't a real risk and that it was overblown. And to those people, my question to you is, how much money do you think drug companies have paid trying to settle these cases out of court to avoid lawsuits? I'll give you a second to think about it. The answer is $1 billion. Over the last 3 decades, drug companies, mostly GlaxoSmithKline with Paxil, have paid out hundreds of millions, nearly, pretty much up to $1 billion settling these cases. That is how common this is. And really, this is a recognized risk. It's already in the drug labels. There's a box warning on SSRIs. It's not controversial at all now. And I'm going to put this up in hell, because what could be worse than killing yourself on a drug when you didn't want to, or losing a loved one to that? So that's about as bad as it can get. Bind, this is Benzodiazepine-Induced neurological dysfunction. This is essentially brain toxicity from long-term benzodiazepine use. Sometimes this happens after several years. Unfortunately, I've seen this happen in a couple of months, sometimes, usually in older female patients, usually the ones who are perimenopausal and they have insomnia. The doctor puts them on Xanax, and 6 months to a year later, they start complaining of agoraphobia. They don't want to leave their house. They have ringing in their ears. They have light sensitivity. They have cognitive dysfunction, brain fog. They're incredibly anxious and ruminative. They try and lower the medication at that point. Their nervous system is so injured and hypersensitive that it makes them feel even worse. And really the only way through this is off the medication. And even once you're off the medication, sometimes it can take a while for the nervous system to heal, years potentially. This can be so bad, it will completely disable some people. They won't be able to work. They won't be able to look after their families. The amount that this costs to treat and the amount of burden on the family members who end up looking after these people is huge. I've seen it tear families apart. I've seen it lead to suicide. And because of that, I'm going to put Bind up here in horror movie. It's not hell, because most people recover from this over time. It is awful and it lasts a very long time, but people get through it. I'm also going to put protracted withdrawal up next to Bind. Essentially the same thing, but protracted withdrawal is triggered when people rapidly come off benzos or antidepressants. There's something about being in an acute, severe withdrawal that's actually harmful to the brain. Again, this completely turns your life upside down, but people do recover. It actually has a fairly good prognosis when viewed over the course of several years. And so that's up there in horror movie. The next one is mania. So SSRIs and drugs like the ADHD medications and anything kind of stimulating can cause mania and disinhibition. In the worst cases, like we were talking about before with James Holmes, that could lead to potentially you harming someone and getting in trouble with the law. But generally what I see people just completely ruin their reputations. They become disinhibited. They think Elon Musk is talking to them or some other celebrity, or they think some celebrity's in love with them. They spend a lot of money. They travel off across the country. They write embarrassing posts on social media. They get tattoos. They do things like that. And so generally, this isn't that serious compared to the rest of the list. It can be, but generally it isn't. So I'm going to put drug-induced mania down here in major life disruption. Usually if people get off the drug and don't get back on, it doesn't happen again. Gambling. Okay, so gambling, this is one that can happen with mania, but it actually happens with Abilify, which is a unique type of antipsychotic, which is a partial agonist at the dopamine receptors, which is unique because most antipsychotics are dopamine blockers. This is a partial agonist. It's used for bipolar and schizophrenia, but because it kind of tickles that dopamine receptor in a way that the others don't, some people like to gamble and they get addicted to gambling. They'll blow hundreds of thousands of dollars, their whole life savings. That's obviously a major life disruption. And so drug-induced gambling can completely ruin your life. You're not going to get your money back afterwards. And that's serious. So major life disruption. Now, the last one is tardive dysphoria. This is like a complicated word. Forget the complicated word. This is essentially drug-induced worsening on antidepressants. And so most people think, antidepressants, my doctor prescribed them, safe and effective. That must mean they were studied for a really long period of time and the brain can tolerate them. That's not true. Most people are usually horrified when I tell them that these drugs aren't studied for any longer than a year, and we have really no idea what they're doing to the brain long term or whether they're even safe and effective. What I can say, having pulled people off these medications, for the last 5 years, many people on SSRIs will develop this condition, and the way they will describe it is they'll feel gradually over time they become very unmotivated, they become very flat, they don't experience any kind of joy in their life, they just feel like they're going through the motions. It's just like life is just really meh. You can't really get excited. And they also feel really fatigued. That's the other thing. They feel really tired over time. This is often missed in a huge way. Doctors will just say, your depression is getting worse. Have some Wellbutrin or do ECT or take some ketamine or something like that. They do not acknowledge the fact that the brain is not designed essentially to be bombarded with chemicals for several years in a row. That's not how our brains are designed. And so they miss the fact that the drug is making them worse. And what the patient actually needs is a taper, and that will make them feel better. And so they end up stacking on a lot of drugs. And before you know it, that person is getting ECT and they have the cognitive damage and they're completely disabled. You could make an argument that this is higher and it goes up to horror movie. I'm going to put it here in life-changing for now because it can go either way. And there you have it. So that was my list of the worst psychiatric drug side effects. What did you think about it? Do you think I got it right or do you think I got it wrong? And were there any that I missed? Tell me about it in the comments below this video. And if you like tier lists like this, check out this video next where we talk about the best and the worst psychiatric medications ranked.